So today I am talking with Jarrod Clyne, who is the Human Rights Advisor to the International Disability Alliance. Hi, Jarrod.
Hi there, Robin. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure. I'm going to get straight down to the questions. The launch of the We the 15 using the Paralympics as a platform should deliver a great start to the campaign. How do you think the launch has gone so far?
Our impression is that it's been extremely successful. We've looked at various metrics in terms of the media and on Twitter. Of course, as always, it's really what lasts that counts. But we're very pleased with the reception, and I think the messaging is quite positive and really trying to use the Paralympics to focus on the rights of all persons with disabilities.
And just for anyone who's not exactly sure, how would you describe what We the 15 is?
So essentially, it's an advocacy and awareness raising campaign. Um, it tries to merge the worlds of human rights advocacy and sport and bring along a wide range of stakeholders, businesses, international organizations, and civil society to really push further for change in the rights and lives of persons with disabilities. Obviously, the legal framework is already there, but what we notice is that political will sometimes is high and other times flags, and crucially, uh, the attitudes and approach of each individual around the world is something that needs continuous effort and focus. So we really hope that that we can make a difference at the individual and institutional level through the We the 15 campaign.
Okay. Um, I mean, I think you've got a big job. So, could you tell us a little bit about your role at the International Disability Alliance and, in fact, what IDA's involvement is with the We the 15 campaign?
Yeah, so my job is a human rights advisor for the International Disability Alliance, which is really focusing here in Geneva on the Human Rights Council and also the World Health Organization and World Health Assembly. I mean, essentially, I just main advocacy activities at the international stages at the United Nations, and there's a huge amount of work done on persons with disabilities, and we're trying to make sure that it's inclusive of persons with disabilities in the process as well. And in terms of We the 15 campaign, it was a product of uh, a memorandum of understanding between the International Disability Alliance, the International Paralympic Committee, and other organizations, including the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights, UNESCO, the Valuable 500 Consortium, and a few others. But the idea came out of a recommendation in part from the Human Rights Council that the so-called worlds of sport and worlds of human rights should somehow work more together to try and make the most of the potential of both of those worlds.
For my own experiences, I competed in Paralympics. I mean, and for me, the games in Seoul were kind of watershed in many ways, not just because it was the first one to have proper audiences, but because of the impact it had on the people of Seoul. And I think that that's one of the long lasting legacies is that impact at the individual level for people who interact with disabled people as well as the disabled people in those communities. So, thinking about that, with human rights and specifically disability rights being so differently interpreted across the globe and sadly, absent in kind of many places, what's the campaign going to target first and how do you believe it can be effective in a global way?
It's a good question. I think, as you say, it's each time the Paralympics is held, there's often a tangible and hopefully long-lasting difference in those countries, and this is really trying to make that change happen around the world. Um, we've seen over the past 2 years persons with disabilities disproportionately affected during the COVID-19 pandemic and response. Despite all the fine words on paper, despite the CRPD, the views of the committee's recommendations, guidelines, frankly, sadly, sometimes this just isn't implemented. It's not followed. So in the first instance, the campaign is focusing on COVID-19 vaccination prioritization for persons with disabilities around the world on an equitable basis. And of course, this means for certain individuals, proper prioritization, not leaving persons with disabilities behind. And so the idea is to write to governments around the world under the We the 15 banner and urge them to do so. I mean, I should say though, some countries absolutely are doing that. It's not that the picture for persons with disabilities in terms of COVID-19 vaccination and indeed on other issues is completely even throughout the world. There are different challenges in different countries, but nonetheless, we do feel that that is the most important issue at this particular juncture, because it really is a matter of life and death. And tragically, the past 18 months, 2 years have shown how structural inequalities and poor policies for persons with disabilities do remain in so many countries. So that'll be the first port of call, first priority.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the most sensible one. I mean, and even here in the UK, rights activists have been up in arms about the lack of equity in treatment for disabled people, and particularly for adults who haven't been in a position to advocate for themselves. Does the campaign, or the links that the campaign of We the 15 has into organisations like yours, have the framework to actually raise legal challenges?
I mean, certainly some organisations that are part of the We the 15 campaign do some legal work, but I would say it's not necessarily the focus. It's more political than legal. I guess strategic litigation is not something that that been so strong on. I mean, I would say that it is extremely important work, and organisations of persons with disabilities around the world do that sometimes, but it's less of the focus. But it's definitely something that could consider. I guess it really goes to the point of what does bring about lasting change, and what is the most efficient and effective and kind of efficacious means of generating that change. And this will differ depending on the country, I suppose. In the US, litigation is the main, or one of the main tools of advocacy, in a way that it perhaps isn't in some other countries, perhaps like your own. I'm not sure if you have any reflections from England on this, but what we have noticed is that in the UK, for example, just to use your national context as an example, the CRPD committee has looked very seriously at some of the policies of the government in the past. For example, the austerity measures imposed some years ago, and that was the subject of the first investigation by the CRPD committee, and they came up with some very firm conclusions on that, and appropriately so. I guess that's not litigation per se; it's quasi-judicial at best, but it is using the UN to advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities. And in my observation, I think that has had a positive difference in the local context. And I should say also that the FCDO are quite an ally internationally in the rights of persons with disabilities. So there is an element of political will generation through CRPD reviews as well.
That's great. So to close, the Paralympics are, we're in the last few days. The flag and the flame will move around the world as the years go on. What is the next stage, or how do you envisage that the campaign is going to be kept going and kept at the forefront of individuals through to governments' minds?
There is a framework for next steps. The campaign aims to be quite ambitious in terms of its duration. It's supposed to run for 10 years. Yeah, there are a list of priority themes to focus on. I've mentioned COVID-19 vaccination, also assistive technology. We've also got prioritization of participation and consultation with organizations of persons with disabilities. And at the same time, there will be a continued strong focus on awareness raising, trying to change individuals' attitudes, because we've noticed that even though the CIPD was a paradigm shift, the idea of persons with disabilities as rights holders, and disability being a social construct, not buying into the charitable or medicalized model, is extremely important. But we find that continued vigilance and constant effort is needed to remind people of this, because people's attitudes about disability and about persons with disabilities shape policy, and this is extremely important to focus on. So I think perhaps the value add for me of the campaign is the extent to which there's buy-in from corporations and a real wide range of stakeholders who are not traditionally as engaged in the rights of persons with disabilities, and also the messaging around ending stereotypes. I'm not sure if you saw the advertisement, but the idea of persons with disabilities are just like everyone else. They have ordinary lives. They're, I mean, you won 9 medals, so in a sense you're inspirational, but we want to also get away from sometimes, what would you call it, using persons with disabilities as an object of inspiration about how brave they are to overcome barriers. It's like, no, you must remove the barriers, you must end discrimination. Persons with disabilities must have substantive, inclusive equality with all, and we hope the campaign will help assist that.
Brilliant, and a great note to finish on. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
Bye bye.